Chapter 17. Hoyt McCoy's Horrible House. Nikki headed toward Green Haven by way of Raven Road. She hadn't really planned to go that way. Her mind was on what she'd just seen in Grover's shed. But when she found herself passing the gravel drive that led back into Hoyt McCoy's overgrown acres, she hesitated. She thought about what Grover had said, that Hoyt McCoy cracked open the sky. Surely that couldn't be true. But whatever he'd seen might have been a sign of wickedness. Mrs. Beason thought there was something strange about this man, that he was probably a trouble spot. And Nikki had promised to help her. So maybe, while she was there, she should check on Hoyt McCoy. She didn't really want to. Even her strong curiosity didn't extend to creepy, isolated houses and people with a whiff of wrongness about them. But if she was going to do her part to root out badness so that goodness could win, she had to be brave. She gritted her teeth and took a deep, shaky breath. She would just dart in and have a quick look around, hoping to see something that would let her take back a clear report to Mrs. Beason. She started up the driveway. Brown, shriveled blackberry vines grew along the edges. Weeds sprouted up through the gravel. Tall pine trees on the left cast a spiky line of shadows, and Nikki stayed within those shadows as much as she could. She rounded a curve, and there, up ahead, was the house, a mud-colored two-story building tucked back among great looming oaks and pines, its paint worn off, drifts of old leaves on its peaked roof. She stopped and looked for signs of movement. 3 birds shot up from a clump of grass, but other than that, she saw nothing stirring, either outside the house or behind its windows. So, cautiously, she moved forward again. What was she looking for? She didn't really know. Something truly awful, like freshly dug graves, or human bones? Signs of craziness, like Hoyt McCoy dancing around naked? Disgusting filthiness, like a smelly outhouse or rat-swarmed garbage? She didn't see anything like that. Nothing but a dusty black car parked at the head of the drive. Maybe bad things happened inside that dark, silent house, but she certainly wasn't going to go close enough to peer in the windows. She would go up to the beginning of the brick path that led to the front door, she decided. And if she didn't see anything notable by then, she'd leave. So she crept away from the protective shadow of the trees and tiptoed across the open space in front of the house. She stood at the foot of the path. Her gaze scanned the front door, the windows to the left and right of the front door, heavily curtained, the windows on the second floor, where the blinds were closed, and a window in a gable above them, where, she took a sudden step backward and her knees went weak, the barrel of a gun pointed at the sky. As she stood there, frozen with fear, the gun angled downward until it aimed straight at her. From inside the house, a voice called out, "Stop right there! Trespasser, intruder, spy! Don't move, on pain of dire consequences!" But Nikki was not going to stand there and get shot. She dashed toward the shadow of the trees as fast as her jelly-like legs would carry her. Any second, she expected to hear a bang and feel the punch of a shot between her shoulder blades. At the edge of the driveway, she stumbled and fell, and she lay there for a second, shaking, and looked back at the house. The gun was still pointing downward, but no one was shouting. No one was coming out the front door. So she staggered to her feet again. This time her legs worked, and she ran. She knew Crystal wouldn't be home yet. So she ran straight to Mrs. Beason's house, leapt up the steps, and rang the doorbell. When Mrs. Beason answered, Nikki was breathing so hard she could barely speak. "Mrs. Beason!" she gasped. "That McCoy man tried to shoot me!" Mrs. Beason's eyes grew so wide that the whites showed all the way around. "What? Shoot you?" Nikki told about the gun pointing out of the window, and the voice that had bellowed at her. "Oh!" Mrs. Beason grasped Nikki by the arm and pulled her inside. "This is even worse than I thought. I must get the police. Must get them out here right now." She hurried away down the hall, leaving Nikki quivering by the door. In a moment, Nikki heard her speaking to someone on the phone. "Raven Road," she said. "Yes, McCoy. Be careful, he has guns. I'll meet you out there." When she came back, she was pulling on her coat. "We'll bring him in," she said. "Don't worry. You poor brave little thing." She gave Nicky a quick, sweet-smelling hug. "I should have known. That feeling I had. Why didn't I?" She clasped her hands and took a deep breath. "Slow down, Brenda," she told herself. "Be calm." But Nicky wasn't calm at all. She was terribly excited. "There's more," she said. "The boy with the snakes, he feeds them live baby mice. And that terrorist up in the woods, he saw him. And he told me Hoyt McCoy cracks open the sky and sends signals to enemy nations." Mrs. Beason snatched her purse from a table by the door. "I have to get out there right away," she said. "You go back home now and keep yourself safe. Who knows, he might be... But we'll get him, don't worry. I'll come and talk to you when it's all over." Nicky went back to Greenhaven, wishing, for once, that Crystal was around, so she could tell her about what had happened. But the only sign of Crystal was a note she'd left on the hall table by the phone. "Nicky, your mom called, sounded pretty tired and worried. Another postcard came from your dad. It said, 'Dear Nicky and Rachel, everything here is going well. We're working hard and making good progress. I hope both of you are taking excellent care of yourselves. Love, Dad. P.S. Stayed up till midnight last night reading Shakespeare. I didn't know your dad read Shakespeare. Back by dinner time. C.' I didn't know he did either, Nicky thought. There was something odd about these postcards. She needed to think about them. Was he trying to send a message of some kind? He'd always liked codes and puzzles. He'd explained a lot of different ones to Nicky, and they'd had fun working on them together. Could these postcards be in code? She went up to the nursery and laid the 3 postcard messages in a row on the window seat. She studied them for a while, but if they were in code, she couldn't figure it out. So she gave up for the moment and played with Otis for a long time. His happy spirit made her feel better. Everything about him made her feel better, in fact. His damp black nose, the way his wavy hair grew on the top of his head, the 5 little pads on the bottoms of his feet, even his doggy smell. They played all their favorite games, and Nicky pondered her father's odd messages, and thoughts of horrible Hoyt McCoy gradually faded from her mind.